Have you ever found something so ordinary that it changed everything you thought you knew about someone you loved? Imagine this. You're cleaning out your grandparents' attic, something you've walked past your whole life, a place stacked with dusty photo albums and the smell of time itself. You're halfway through tossing out old receipts and broken picture frames, just ready to be done with it all, when you find a locked metal box. No key, no label, just sitting there like it's been waiting for you. And when you finally pry it open, what you find inside doesn't just surprise you. It rewrites your family history. This isn't just a story. It's a revelation. And by the time this video ends, you're going to understand why this girl now questions everything her grandfather ever told her. Yes, you're going to get the answer you came here for, and I promise, it's going to shake you. Hey you watching right now. Don't click off.
Not yet.
I know your attention is pulled in a million directions, but this one is different. We all have secrets in our families. Things that were never talked about. Stories that didn't add up. But what if the person you admired most, the one you put on a pedestal, was living a double life? What if the stories you were told growing up were carefully scripted, polished versions of the truth, designed to protect you, or maybe protect them? I want you to feel something with this story. Suspense, betrayal, that gut punch when trust is broken. I want you to see yourself in this girl, to feel like it could have happened in your own life, in your own family. Because it could. That's what makes this story not just intriguing, but personal. You're not just watching a video. You're stepping into a mystery, one rooted in real emotion, where memories collide with secrets, and where love can cloud our judgment in ways we don't even realize until it's too late. I want to be straight with you. This isn't one of those stories where the twist is handed to you in 5 minutes. No, this one unfolds like a puzzle. Every detail matters. And trust me, you'll want to stay till the end, because what starts with a girl finding an old photo in her grandpa's things will lead her down a path filled with war documents, hidden identities, and even someone who may not have been dead at all. That's right. You read that correctly. There's a reason this video is trending under Family Secrets, Unexpected Discoveries, and True Story Reveals, because it taps into something bigger than just one mystery. It's about the people we think we know and the truth that hides in plain sight. Let me ask you something. How well do you really know your grandparents? I'm serious. Think about it. Most of us only know the version of them they've chosen to show us. The kind smile, the stories about the good old days, the birthday cards with a crisp $10 bill. But what about their lives before you were born? Before they were parents? Before they settled into that quiet routine of crossword puzzles and early dinners? The truth is, every grandparent was once someone else, a young person with dreams, mistakes, maybe even another name. That's what this story is really about. It's about uncovering the life that existed before the one we were told about. And in this case, what this girl discovered about her grandpa will make you question everything. Her name is Ellie, and for as long as she could remember, her grandpa, Frank, was her hero. He wasn't just the family patriarch, he was the rock. He served in the military, taught her how to ride a bike, and made the best grilled cheese sandwiches on Sunday mornings. Everyone respected Frank. He was the kind of guy who always had an answer, always had a story. But after he passed away last winter, something strange happened. At first, it was just little things. Photos she didn't recognize, names she'd never heard of, papers written in a language she couldn't understand. Ellie thought maybe it was just a part of his life he didn't talk about. But then she found the letter, folded neatly in an envelope, tucked inside a hollowed-out Bible, addressed not to her, not even to her mom, but to someone named Anna. The problem? No one in her family had ever heard that name before. And that was just the beginning. Ellie couldn't let it go. Something about that name, Anna, sparked a feeling she couldn't explain. A quiet tug in the back of her mind that said, "This matters." So she started digging. At first it was harmless, old photo albums, newspaper clippings, military medals. But then things started getting strange. Documents with mismatched birth dates. 2 social security numbers registered under her grandfather's name. A grainy photo from the 1970s with a man who looked exactly like Frank, but labeled with a completely different name, Victor. Suddenly, the man she idolized wasn't just Grandpa Frank. He might have been someone else entirely. Someone with a past he never wanted anyone to find out about. And here's where it gets even crazier. When Ellie took that photo to a friend who works in digital archiving, something unexpected happened. The friend ran the image through a recognition tool tied to public records and declassified military archives, and it pinged. Not once, but 3 times. In 3 different countries. The name Viktor Novak came up, along with mentions of Cold War espionage, dual citizenship, and even a missing persons case that was never solved. Now, before you go thinking this sounds like some Hollywood script, know this. Every step Ellie took was backed by real evidence. Records. Letters. Audio tapes that hadn't been played in decades. What started as a girl mourning her grandfather became a full-blown investigation. But here's the question you came here to answer. Who was Frank really? And why did he go to such lengths to keep his past buried? Was he running from something or someone? Was he involved in something dangerous? And most importantly, why did he hide it from the people who loved him most? This story isn't just about uncovering a secret. It's about what happens after you find it. The emotional fallout. The shift in how you see your family. The realization that even the people closest to you can carry entire lives beneath the surface. This is about identity. How fragile and powerful it can be. It's about memory, trust, and the lies we tell ourselves to keep going. Ellie's journey is raw, and it's real. And by the time we get to the end of it, you're going to feel like you were right there with her, turning over each clue, feeling that knot in your stomach grow tighter with every new revelation. In the weeks following her grandfather's funeral, Ellie had been drifting, physically there, emotionally numb. Grief has a way of making time feel distorted, like the days blend into each other and nothing quite makes sense. She had taken a break from college, moved back home to help her mom settle the estate, and kept herself busy organizing boxes of memories that didn't seem ready to be unearthed. Her grandfather, Frank, had always been the pillar of stability in their lives. Firm, loving, deeply disciplined. A retired Air Force mechanic, he had this grounded presence that made you feel like everything was going to be okay, no matter what. But now, walking through the quiet of his house, Ellie couldn't shake the growing feeling that something was off. There were too many things that didn't add up. Like the locked drawer in his desk. Why did a retired grandpa need a drawer that required a key he hid inside a hollowed-out baseball trophy? Or the phone number scribbled on the back of a decades-old photo that connected to an area code Ellie didn't recognize. It was in Croatia. And Frank, as far as everyone knew, had never even been to Europe. The first real crack in the story appeared when Ellie found a manila envelope labeled simply Helsinki. Inside were foreign documents, travel permits, identification cards, and a letter written in Russian. She stared at them for a long time, confused, flipping each one over like they might somehow explain themselves. The name printed on the passport wasn't Frank Dawson. It was Viktor Nowak. Born in 1938. Occupation: logistics officer. None of it made sense. Ellie had always believed her grandfather was born in Ohio, spent most of his life in Michigan, and served proudly in the Air Force for over 20 years. But this passport was dated 1961. It looked real, aged, stamped, official. But who was Viktor? And why did he look exactly like her grandpa? Ellie didn't tell her mom right away. She wasn't sure how. Instead, she turned to the only person she trusted to keep something this big quiet, her best friend Maya, a journalism major who had a knack for digging deeper than anyone really asked her to. Maya's first instinct wasn't denial, it was curiosity. That's what made her such a good researcher. They spent days combing through every detail they could find about Viktor Nowak, even pulling government records and Cold War-era immigration files from public archives. At first, it was a dead end. But then came a match in an obscure newspaper article from 1974. It reported that a man named Viktor Nowak was wanted in connection with an arms smuggling case tied to Eastern Bloc defectors. The article was vague, but the photo embedded in the scan was unmistakable. Ellie's stomach dropped. She stared at it, her fingers going cold. It was him. Or at least someone who looked exactly like him. The posture, the eyes, even the way he smiled, it was her grandfather. But if this was true, what had he done? It was around this time that strange things started happening. Ellie's laptop crashed unexpectedly, not once, but twice, wiping the files she had collected. Her emails to a contact at a European history group suddenly bounced back. Maya noticed someone was trying to gain access to her cloud storage from an untraceable IP address. It was probably just paranoia, they told themselves. Just technical glitches. But deep down, Ellie began to wonder. What if someone didn't want her asking questions? Was she digging into something bigger than she could handle? Ellie kept searching. One night, while flipping through her grandfather's journals, pages and pages of seemingly ordinary thoughts about fishing, sports scores, and weather, she found something hidden between the margins. A page ripped out from a different notebook, folded and taped to the back cover. It was a list. Just 3 names. No explanations. One of the names was crossed out. One was unfamiliar. And the third was Anna. It was this that finally pushed Ellie to track her down. After more searching, she found an address tied to a care facility in Pennsylvania. The staff was hesitant at first, privacy rules and all that, but when Ellie explained she believed Anna might be a relative, they agreed to let her visit. The drive was long, quiet, and unsettling. She played the same playlist on repeat, trying to keep herself calm. When she arrived, Anna was in the garden, a frail woman in her late 80s with sharp eyes that flickered with recognition the moment Ellie introduced herself. It was like she'd been waiting. When Ellie said her grandfather's name, Frank Dawson, Anna didn't blink. But when she whispered the name Victor, Anna dropped her teacup. It shattered on the concrete like a gunshot. What followed was not the kind of explanation Ellie expected. Anna spoke in riddles at first, stories of a man who had 2 lives, who disappeared one night with a suitcase and never came back. She mentioned something called the switching protocol, a phrase that meant nothing to Ellie but made Maya go pale when she later Googled it. According to a thread buried deep on an old Cold War conspiracy forum, the switching protocol was a rumored program where spies were embedded into Western families under completely new identities, sometimes using the identities of deceased soldiers. Ellie refused to believe it at first. It sounded like something out of a spy thriller, not real life. But then Anna showed her a photo she had kept all these years, of a man standing next to her, in a military uniform. And there he was again. The same man. Her grandfather. Or at least, the man she thought was her grandfather. But even then, not everything lined up. Anna said Victor was deeply in love with her, that they planned to flee the East together. But if that was true, why had he ended up living quietly in the Midwest under a different name? Why raise a family? Why never speak of Anna again? Was it really love, or was Anna not telling the whole story? The further Ellie went, the more questions surfaced. She began to wonder if Anna was even telling the truth, or if she had her own reasons for playing along with the story. After all, no one could prove Victor and Frank were the same person yet. And then there was the third name on the list Ellie found, the one that hadn't been crossed out, the one that didn't match anyone in her family tree. A man named Edward Crowell. That's when the story took another turn. A check on Edward's name pulled up a flagged file from the National Archives, one that was only recently declassified. It mentioned a surveillance operation in Chicago during the 1980s and a series of disappearances tied to suspected sleeper agents. No charges were ever brought, and most of the records were redacted, but one line stood out in the file. Subject Crowell believed to have maintained contact with Nowak alias until 1989. That was 5 years before Ellie was even born. And all this time, Edward Crowell had been living quietly 2 towns over, running a pawn shop. The pieces were starting to form a picture, but one that kept shifting, refusing to settle into place. Was her grandfather a criminal? A spy? A hero who fled a dangerous life to protect his family? Or was he something darker, someone who manipulated people to hide his past? And what about Edward? Was he a friend, an accomplice, or a threat? There were too many questions and not nearly enough answers. And Ellie couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still watching, still tracking her every move, just like those suspicious logins on her phone, the calls with no caller ID that hung up after one ring, the black SUV parked down the street 3 nights in a row. Whether it was real or just paranoia, she didn't know anymore. All she knew was that the deeper she went, the more dangerous the truth seemed to become. And then came the night the package arrived. No return address, just her name scrawled in shaky handwriting. Inside was a VHS tape and a note that read, "Play this somewhere no one can hear." Ellie had no idea what she was about to uncover. But once she pressed play, nothing in her life would ever be the same again. Ellie waited until everyone was asleep before slipping the tape into the old VCR she'd dug out from her mom's attic. She didn't even tell Maya about the package. Something about the way it was delivered, no name, no return address, no clue how anyone even knew where she lived, made her feel like this had to be seen alone. The screen flickered for a second, static crackled, and then an old, grainy video faded in. At first it looked like a home movie. Snow on the ground. A man walking up a driveway toward a small cabin. But as the footage continued, Ellie realized the man was her grandfather. Or rather, the man she'd always thought was her grandfather. Only this time he was speaking in a different language. The words were harsh and clipped. Russian, maybe. There was another man off camera, holding what looked like a thick briefcase, and just behind them, a third man pacing like he was keeping watch. The conversation was muffled, but the tone was tense, urgent. The tape cut out just as the man with the briefcase pointed directly at the camera and shouted something. Then black. Ellie sat frozen, her heart pounding. Who had recorded this? Why send it now? And if this was real, what exactly had her grandfather been involved in? She rewound it and played it again, watching for clues, for dates, anything that could help her place the setting. But then, as she reached to eject the tape, the machine jammed. Smoke hissed from the slot. The screen went blank. Within seconds, the entire tape was destroyed. It was like it had been timed to self-destruct. Panic surged through her. The evidence was gone. Her only proof. The next morning, she tried to explain it all to Maya, who was already suspicious of how things were escalating. Ellie, she said carefully, we're not journalists. We're not spies. Whatever this is, it's not just some mystery anymore. It's dangerous. Ellie knew she was right, but she also knew they were past the point of turning back. Still, Maya insisted they back up every file, every note, every lead in multiple locations just in case something happened. That same night, while uploading everything to a second cloud server, they got a message from a burner email. No subject line. No body text. Just a single attachment. A photo of Ellie standing outside the care facility, where she'd met Anna. It had been taken from across the street, through a car window. Ellie's hands shook. "Who's watching me?" she whispered. Then came the knock at the door. It was late, after midnight. Maya peeked through the blinds and saw a man in a long coat standing under the porch light, holding something in his hand. He didn't ring the bell, just knocked once more, then slid a small envelope under the door and walked away. They waited almost 10 minutes before daring to pick it up. Inside was a note written in shaky handwriting. "You don't know what he was running from. Stop digging before you find out." For days, Ellie felt like she was being followed. She stopped sleeping. Even in daylight, she felt like eyes were on her. When she went back to the National Archives to pull more records on Edward Crowell, she was told the file had been restricted again, classified under a national security order. "That's not supposed to happen," the clerk whispered, confused. "Once it's declassified, it usually stays that way." But now, access was denied. Ellie realized someone out there was actively covering tracks, erasing trails, making sure the story stayed buried. Then Maya uncovered something even more disturbing. Anna, the sweet old woman who had seemed so sincere, so broken by loss, had been institutionalized years before for a breakdown related to false memories. A diagnosis from the early 90s suggested she had constructed an entire fantasy about a man she claimed betrayed her during the Cold War. There was no record of Victor Nowak in any of her medical or legal files. No photos. No documents. Nothing. It was like she'd invented him completely. But if that was true, how did she recognize Ellie? How did she know what Victor looked like? How did she drop that teacup the moment Ellie said his name? And then there was Edward. Ellie finally tracked him down to his pawn shop, an old, dusty place with flickering lights and a strange smell of burnt plastic. Edward was in his 70s, a heavy-set man with thick glasses and a limp. He greeted Ellie with a wary smile, like he'd been expecting her. "I always knew someone would come," he said, unlocking the front door and motioning her inside. He didn't ask how she found him. He didn't ask who she was. He just said, "Let's talk about Victor." But something about him felt off. He didn't offer her a seat, didn't ask her any questions, just started speaking in riddles, telling half-truths and dodging every direct question. When Ellie asked if Victor was really her grandfather, Edward laughed, not kindly. "You think this is about bloodlines?" he said. "This is about legacy. About unfinished business." Victor didn't run because he was scared. He ran because he knew too much. And some people don't forgive that kind of knowledge. Before she could press him for more, he handed her a small black notebook and told her to leave. "Don't read it here. And don't come back." When she got home and opened it, she expected answers. Instead, she found something much worse. Inside were coordinates. Locations across the country, scribbled next to cryptic phrases like Junction 18, burned before extraction, and Redbird asset failure, containment required. The last page simply read, "If she finds this, she'll need to choose truth or safety." Then came the twist Ellie never saw coming, because taped to the final page of the notebook was a photo she had never seen before, her mother, no older than 20, standing beside Frank and Edward, smiling, like old friends, like allies. But her mother had never mentioned knowing Edward, not once. And when Ellie confronted her about it, her mom's entire expression changed. Her face went pale. Her hands began to shake. And all she could whisper was, "Where did you find that?" Which begs the question, what else is Ellie's mother hiding? Ellie didn't sleep that night. The look on her mother's face after seeing the photo wasn't just fear, it was recognition. A recognition laced with guilt, like something buried for decades had suddenly clawed its way back to the surface. But no matter how many times Ellie asked, pleaded, demanded, her mother only repeated the same phrase, almost like a prayer. "I thought it was over. I thought it was over." Not "I don't know." Not "you're mistaken." Just pure dread, as if someone had turned the lights back on in a haunted room she'd tried to forget. That silence, her mother's refusal to explain, gnawed at Ellie like a splinter under the skin, and she knew then that her own family wasn't just hiding secrets. They were protecting them. But just as Ellie was spiraling from that revelation, the mystery deepened, this time from a completely unexpected angle. Maya, who had taken a step back from the investigation after the threatening note, called Ellie early the next morning. Her voice was shaky, clipped with adrenaline. "You need to come to my place right now. Something's not right." When Ellie arrived, Maya led her into her apartment, where a manila envelope sat on the kitchen table, completely unmarked, except for one thing, Ellie's name typed across the front in all caps. "It was in my mailbox," Maya said. "No postage. No tracking. Just this." Inside the envelope was a second photograph, this one much older, almost yellowed with age. It was of a young girl, no older than 10, sitting on a bench next to an unfamiliar man whose face had been scratched out with red ink. But what sent shivers down Ellie's spine wasn't the photo, it was the note paper clipped to the back. "She's not who she says she is. Look closer at your friend." It wasn't signed. No fingerprints. No clue who sent it. But the implication was clear. Someone was trying to drive a wedge between her and Maya. Or worse, someone knew Maya was now part of the investigation and wanted her out. At first, Ellie brushed it off as manipulation, an obvious tactic to isolate her. But Maya looked genuinely shaken. "Ellie, that's me. That's me in the photo. I don't remember this. I don't know who that man is." She started digging through her childhood albums, trying to piece together the setting, the clothes, the time period. And then, just when Ellie began wondering if Maya had been unknowingly part of something larger, a second memory surfaced, one Maya had never talked about. As a child, she said, she used to have recurring dreams about a man who would stand at the foot of her bed, whispering numbers in her ear. Numbers she could never remember by morning. Her parents always said it was night terrors. But now she wasn't so sure. Especially when Ellie realized something that sent a chill down her spine. The coordinates from Edward's notebook. They matched the number sequence Maya remembered from those childhood nightmares. It was too precise to be a coincidence. At that moment, everything shifted. This wasn't just about Ellie's grandfather anymore. Someone had been pulling strings long before either of them realized it, orchestrating something that spanned generations. It wasn't just her family tangled in this, it was Maya's too. The deeper they dug, the more connections appeared, like a web stretching silently beneath their feet. Every time they thought they had a grasp on the story, it changed shape. They found records of a secretive Cold War program dubbed Project Halcyon, buried in obscure corners of old government archives, now redacted almost entirely, except for one unaltered document, a list of codenames. Victor, of course, was one. So was Redbird. And horrifyingly, another codename leapt off the page, Echo 12. It had been crossed out violently in black ink, but beneath it, in faded type, was a name handwritten beside it. Maya L. Unstable. Requires observation. That was it. That was the moment Maya's hands began to tremble, her face pale and unreadable. "This can't be real," she muttered. "This has to be someone messing with us." But deep down, they both knew no one else would go to such lengths. No one else could tie their lives together with such terrifying precision, unless there was a reason. Ellie started to question everything, how they became friends, why they'd always been drawn to the same places, the same interests. Was this really all coincidence? Or had their paths been manipulated from the very beginning? As if sensing their panic, the threats escalated. Maya's apartment was broken into that night. Nothing stolen. Nothing damaged. Just her laptop open, her desktop background changed to a single word in all caps, remember. They took it to the police, but there was no sign of forced entry, and no one seemed to believe them. "It's probably a prank," the officer said. "Some kids messing around." But Ellie knew better. This was too calculated. Too personal. And she realized then that the mystery she'd stumbled into wasn't just a matter of old secrets or missing files. It was alive. Watching them. Reacting. Even more terrifying, she began to suspect that Victor didn't run from something. He ran from someone. And now, whoever that was might be coming back. But who exactly was hunting them, and why now? That answer, it seemed, would only reveal itself with the next piece of the puzzle. And what they found next changed everything. Ellie had always believed that fear was a feeling, an emotional response to danger. But now, fear was something else entirely. It was in the silence between footsteps, in the low hum of her refrigerator late at night, in the way her phone sometimes flickered without warning. It was in the way the air shifted when she walked down her street and noticed the same blue sedan parked in a slightly different spot each day. Fear had stopped being an idea. It had become the atmosphere she lived in, thick and suffocating. 3 days had passed since the break-in at Maya's apartment, and neither of them had slept well since. They kept the lights on all night, checked the doors 3 times before locking them, jumped at every vibration from their phones. At first, they thought maybe they were just paranoid, their minds spiraling from too many unanswered questions. But then something happened that neither of them could explain away. Maya didn't show up to meet Ellie at the coffee shop like they had planned. She didn't text, didn't call, and her phone went straight to voicemail. Ellie waited nearly an hour before driving to her apartment, heart pounding the whole way. When she got there, the door was ajar, not wide open, just slightly, like someone wanted her to notice. Inside, everything looked untouched at first. No signs of a struggle, nothing obviously missing. But Maya's phone was sitting on the kitchen counter, next to a mug still half full of cold coffee. Her purse was slung over the back of a chair, and the jacket she always wore was hanging by the door. Ellie called out her name, checked the bedroom, the bathroom. Nothing. It was like she had just vanished. Panic sank its claws in deep. Ellie called the police, filed a missing persons report, tried not to sound as frantic as she felt. The officer on duty asked the usual questions, but there was no sign of foul play, no evidence that would make Maya's disappearance a priority. "Maybe she just needed a break," he said. People disappear for all kinds of reasons. Ellie wanted to scream. This wasn't a break. This was a message. She went home that night and tore apart the notebook Edward had given her, trying to find something they'd missed. Anything. But then her phone buzzed. It was a new message, no contact info, no subject, just a single line, "You're next." And below it, an image. At first glance, it looked like nothing. Blurry. Dark. But when Ellie turned the brightness all the way up, her stomach flipped. It was a photo taken from outside her bedroom window. From just hours ago. She dropped the phone like it was on fire. Every window, every blind, every door. She locked them all, checked them again, and then hid in her closet with her laptop, unable to breathe. Every rational part of her screamed to stop, to walk away, to burn the notebook, delete the files, pretend none of this ever happened. But another part, the part that had been growing louder since the moment she watched that tape, knew the only way out was through. She opened her email, searched for the most recent backup Maya had sent, and began cross-referencing the coordinates in the notebook again, this time looking for overlaps between the code names and the dates. What she found wasn't just strange, it was horrifying. Every single name in the file had a redacted report attached to it, but buried deep in the metadata of the file headers, she found a consistent time marker. All entries were either activated or erased on the exact same date, March 17, 1998. Her birthday. That couldn't be a coincidence. She called her mother, heart pounding, needing answers, but the call rang twice and then went to voicemail. Then her phone buzzed again. Another message. This time it was a video 6 seconds long. Ellie opened it without thinking. The screen showed a dark room lit by a flickering light bulb. In the middle of the frame was Maya, tied to a chair, head down, not moving. A shadow moved behind her, and a voice distorted through static whispered, "She knew too much." "So do you." Then the screen went black. Ellie screamed, throwing the phone across the room, sobbing into her hands as every nerve in her body felt like it was on fire. This wasn't a warning anymore. This was a declaration. They had Maya. And if Ellie kept pushing, she'd be next. Her mind raced through every possibility. Who was doing this? Why now? What the endgame was, but nothing added up. She tried calling her mother again. No answer. Then she remembered something she hadn't noticed before. On the back of the photograph she'd found in Maya's envelope, under the typed message, barely visible in the corner, were the faded initials. DK. Those were her grandfather's initials. David Elias Crowell. But everyone had always called him Frank. Frank wasn't even a middle name. It was a name he invented. A disguise. Ellie's heart dropped into her stomach. If he had used an alias with the family, what else had he lied about? And then it hit her like a freight train. Maybe the person Maya had been trying to find her entire life wasn't Victor. Maybe it had been Frank all along. Maybe they were the same person. Or maybe, just maybe, the man they were chasing didn't actually exist anymore. Maybe he'd become something else. And as Ellie sat alone in the dark, breathing in short, shaky gasps, she began to realize that the biggest question wasn't who her grandfather was. It was what he'd done to make so many people want to keep it buried. And now, she was about to find out the price of digging up the truth. Ellie didn't leave her apartment for 2 days. She barely slept, barely ate. Her eyes burned from the constant glow of her computer screen, scanning every piece of information she and Maya had collected, trying to make sense of it all. The video of Maya, the flickering light bulb, the distorted voice, the warning, played over and over in her mind like a looping nightmare. But something about it had been gnawing at her, something she couldn't quite articulate until the third or fourth replay. The chair. Maya's chair. The one she always used in her home office. Ellie paused the video, took a screenshot, and zoomed in. The stitching on the armrest, the small crack near the base, it was identical. The video hadn't been recorded in some underground facility or abandoned warehouse. It was filmed in Maya's apartment. But Ellie had already checked every room the night she vanished. Hadn't she? Fueled by dread and adrenaline, Ellie rushed to Maya's building and convinced the landlord to let her back in under the pretense of collecting Maya's things. Every light in the apartment was off, the air stale and cold. The place looked exactly as she remembered. Undisturbed, eerily silent. But this time, she noticed something she hadn't before. The hallway coat closet had faint scuff marks near the bottom, like it had been dragged recently. She opened the door and stared at the coats hanging neatly inside. Then she reached behind them and pressed against the back wall, which creaked slightly under her hand. Her breath caught. She pushed harder, and the panel shifted. It wasn't a wall. It was a hidden door. Behind it was a narrow stairwell, steep and unfinished, leading down into darkness. Ellie's hands trembled as she descended, her phone flashlight cutting through the shadows. At the bottom was a small room, cold, cement, and windowless. And in the center there it was, the same chair from the video. But it was empty. No Maya. No sign of life. Just a faint smell of bleach and something else, metallic, sharp. Her heart thudded in her ears as she scanned the room and found what looked like a panel on the wall, connected to an ancient-looking recording device. There were no tapes, no digital files. Just a small paper folder with red file, stamped in red ink. Inside it was a stack of photographs. And what she saw in those photos knocked the air out of her lungs. One was a picture of her mother, at least 20 years younger, standing next to a man who wasn't Edward or Frank or Victor. He was someone Ellie had never seen before, but beside them stood a girl that looked exactly like her. Except it couldn't be. The timestamp on the photo was dated 5 years before Ellie was born. Beneath that was another photo, taken years later, of her grandfather, except he was in military uniform, standing next to the same unknown man from the first photo, with the same classified project name scrawled across the top. Project Halcyon, Subject Replication Initiative. Ellie's entire body went numb. She flipped through the rest of the folder, surveillance reports, medical documents, even psychological assessments labeled with her name. One file even referred to her as version 3, whatever that meant. It felt like fiction, like some kind of psychological thriller playing out in real time, but it was real. The documents were official. They were stamped, archived, hidden, and she was somehow in them. Before she could process it further, a voice echoed from the top of the stairs. "You weren't supposed to find this." Ellie froze, clutching the folder to her chest. It was her mother, but her tone was colder than Ellie had ever heard. Not scared, not confused, controlled.
"Come."
"I warned you not to keep digging," she said, stepping into the light, her eyes hollow, almost resigned. "You weren't supposed to remember anything. You were supposed to forget." Ellie couldn't speak. Her throat had dried up, her mind spinning. "What does that mean?" She finally choked out. "What do you mean, remember?" Her mother stepped closer, her expression unreadable. "You were part of it. Just like Maya. Just like the others. The project never ended, Ellie. They just buried it. Changed the names. Changed the cities. Changed you." That's when it hit her. The reason the faces in the photos looked familiar. The reason she and Maya had memories that didn't fully belong to them. The reason Edward, Frank, Victor had created the notebooks, the codes, the layers. They weren't just chasing a mystery. They were part of the experiment. Everything Ellie believed about her past, her family, her identity, was built on lies. And now, the person she trusted most was standing in front of her, holding the key to a truth more terrifying than she could have imagined. A truth that, if revealed, could bring down everything. But before Ellie could ask another question, her mother whispered, "They're already coming. You have to run." And then, behind her, footsteps thundered down the stairs. The next few minutes blurred into panic. Ellie didn't even remember how she got out of the basement. Her legs moved on instinct, scrambling up the stairs and out the front door while her mother stood frozen in place behind her. She didn't look back, she couldn't. The warning was still ringing in her ears. They're already coming. Every instinct screamed that it was now or never. That whatever was chasing her, whatever was hiding behind that sanitized lie of a childhood, had been waiting for this moment. And now it was here. She drove for hours without direction, her hands shaking so violently she had to keep pulling over to breathe. Eventually, she found herself parked at a rundown motel just off the highway, too exhausted to keep running but too terrified to sleep. She locked herself in the bathroom, turned on the shower to drown out the silence, and opened the folder again. Every word, every image, slicing deeper into the version of reality she thought she knew. Version 3, the files had said. Memory implantation test subjects. Active reset required after failed recall. And there on the last page was a list of names. Hers, Maya's, and 6 others. All with birth dates. All eerily close together. All tagged with locations across the country, places Ellie had never been. Or at least, thought she hadn't. The next morning, just after sunrise, her phone buzzed with a private number. Against her better judgment, she answered. It was her mother. Her voice was tight, hollow, like something inside her had broken overnight. "You need to come home," she said. "There's more you need to understand. I didn't tell you everything, not because I didn't want to, but because I wasn't allowed to." Ellie wanted to scream, to ask why she was still keeping secrets, but something in her mother's voice stopped her. It wasn't fear. It was guilt. Later that day, Ellie stood in the doorway of her childhood home, everything around her warped with betrayal. Her mother was sitting at the kitchen table, an untouched cup of coffee in front of her, eyes red like she hadn't slept. And then she said it, the sentence that gutted Ellie to her core. "You were never meant to be born." Silence followed like a punch to the chest. Not the way you were. You're not sick. You're not cursed. But you were engineered. Designed as part of something they said would protect future generations. Only it didn't. It fractured them. Her mind went blank. The concept was too large, too inhuman to absorb. "So what, I'm some kind of clone?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Her mother shook her head. "Not exactly. You're real. You're human. But your memories, your instincts, even your personality, it was all curated. Controlled. They embedded false experiences into your development to steer your life. The man you called Grandpa, he wasn't a hero. He was the lead scientist behind all of it. And when he saw what it was doing to the first group of children, he tried to stop it. He ran. Changed his name. Started a new life." Ellie's knees buckled, and she collapsed into a chair, head spinning. And Maya? She was part of it too. Her mother nodded slowly. But she started to remember. They all did, eventually. And that's why they're disappearing. They're trying to undo the experiment before it becomes public. Just then, her phone buzzed again. A text. Unknown number. "We see you." And attached another photo. This time it was a picture of Ellie and her mother, sitting right where they were now. Taken moments ago. From outside the window. Her heart nearly stopped. It was happening in real time. The watchers weren't somewhere far away. They were here. That's when her mother said the words Ellie hoped she'd never have to hear. "You have 2 options. Leave everything. Disappear. I have the means to get you out. New name, new life, clean slate. Or stay and fight. Keep chasing the truth. But if you do, you need to know, it could cost you everything." It was the kind of choice that didn't feel like a choice at all. Safety meant surrendering every piece of her identity, leaving Maya behind, burying a legacy she didn't ask for, but was now chained to. But staying meant risking not only her life, but the lives of anyone she came in contact with. Every step forward painted a bigger target on her back. Tears stung her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. The weight of her decision was already crashing down around her. Somewhere out there, Maya might still be alive. Somewhere out there, the other names on that list might be waiting for someone to connect the dots. Ellie clenched the folder in her hands, heart pounding with a new kind of clarity. She looked her mother in the eye, breath trembling, and asked the one question that still haunted her more than anything else. "If everything I remember was fabricated, then who am I really?" Her mother didn't answer, and outside the window, a dark car idled quietly, engine humming like a clock ticking down. Ellie didn't sleep that night. She didn't even try. Every shadow outside her childhood home felt like it was watching her. Every creak in the walls felt intentional. The air itself carried a pressure she couldn't shake, like the silence before a storm. She spent hours on the floor of her old bedroom, folder open, trying to string together a timeline, a motive, anything that could make the pieces click. But with every connection she made, the picture only got bigger and far more terrifying. The experiment her grandfather had overseen wasn't isolated. It wasn't just about Ellie or Maya or even the others listed in the folder. It was part of a massive, coordinated program that spanned decades and cities. A buried network of initiatives masked under private sector contracts, secret research grants, and military oversight. Project Halcyon was just one name among many. As dawn broke, her mother made a call. Ellie couldn't hear much, but the urgency in her voice made her skin crawl. Half an hour later, someone knocked at the back door. A tall man in a navy coat and dark-rimmed glasses stepped in like he owned the place. Ellie recognized him immediately. He'd been at every major milestone in her life. High school graduation, college move-in day, even her first apartment lease. He was never front and center, always blending into the background, always a friend of the family. But now, here he was, stepping into her home like a handler retrieving an asset. And the worst part? Her mother didn't even flinch. His name was Grayson, and he was no friend. "You weren't supposed to trigger this far," he said, laying a silver briefcase on the kitchen table like it was just another day at the office. "Your file indicated limited recall and low threat probability." Clearly, that was inaccurate. Ellie stood frozen. "Who are you?" she demanded, but he ignored the question and opened the case. Inside were 2 vials, a set of syringes, and an old-looking photo ID, hers, but it wasn't a driver's license. It was government-issued, stamped and dated from a facility in New Mexico she'd never heard of. "You can't run anymore, Eleanor," he said, using her full name like a weapon. "You've already crossed too many lines. We can either clean this up with dignity, or it gets very loud and very public." Her mother looked away, ashamed. That's when Ellie realized this wasn't new for her mom. She'd seen this man before. She'd worked with him, maybe even for him. The betrayal stung deeper than any wound Ellie had ever felt. Everything her mother said about protecting her, about being forced into silence, it wasn't the full truth. She'd been an accomplice. And worse, she'd been lying even now. But before Ellie could react, the back window shattered. A canister rolled across the floor, releasing a thick cloud of smoke. Grayson grabbed the case, barking into a radio, but it was chaos. Through the haze, masked figures burst in from every direction. Ellie was yanked backward by gloved hands, dragged through the garage, shoved into the back of a van. Her vision blurred, coughing uncontrollably, but she caught one final glimpse before the door slammed shut. Her mother, standing still in the smoke, watching her go without moving to stop it. She woke up somewhere cold. Industrial lighting buzzed overhead. Cinder block walls surrounded her. It wasn't a prison, but it wasn't freedom either. A woman's voice echoed from an intercom, familiar but distorted. "Ellie, if you're hearing this, it means you're not ready to leave yet. There's still more to know." The room's single door opened, and a figure stepped in. It was Maya. She looked thinner, haunted, but alive. And her first words shattered what little stability Ellie had left. They didn't just create memories, Elle. They copied consciousness. The project wasn't just about you and me. There are dozens of us, replicas, backups, alternates. Different lives lived in parallel, just waiting to be activated. Some are still out there, living normal lives. Others weren't so lucky. Ellie tried to speak, but nothing came out. Maya stepped closer. "And we're not the only ones they're watching. Your boyfriend? Ben? He's not who you think he is either. He was assigned to monitor you once your grandfather disappeared. He was your failsafe." Ellie's chest tightened. Images of Ben flashed in her mind, his uncanny ability to show up at the right time, the way he always steered her away from digging into the past, even his oddly specific knowledge about her family. It had all seemed like coincidence, but now it felt like design. And then Maya handed her a tablet. On it was a map, dozens of red markers blinking across the U.S., with dates, names, files. "This isn't about reclaiming your life anymore," Maya said. "It's about exposing the truth before they erase it for good." Ellie stared at the screen, each blinking, representing another person like her, another life manipulated, Another lie orchestrated. The conspiracy wasn't just personal. It was national. It was systemic. She wasn't just a girl uncovering family secrets anymore. She was a threat to a machine that had been operating for decades in silence. And now that machine was turning to crush her before she could speak. But she wouldn't run this time. She couldn't. Too many lives were at stake. And the worst part was, this war had already begun. The storm hit just after midnight, literally and metaphorically. Rain lashed the empty streets outside the derelict broadcasting tower where Ellie and Maya had tracked the signal. It was an old government facility disguised as an abandoned radio relay. But underground, it pulsed with life, generators humming, data streams bouncing across servers that hadn't been decommissioned at all. This was the core. The archive. The place where everything had been recorded, stored, and rewritten. Ellie's memories. Maya's disappearance. The origin of Project Halcyon. Everything pointed here, and the final clue, a hidden audio file embedded in her grandfather's encrypted case notes, had led them straight to it. Inside, the silence was thick, broken only by the low thrum of machinery. Rows of biometric scanners lined the walls, all inactive now, like ghosts of a project meant to stay buried. Maya had pulled intel from a whistleblower who used to work there, someone named Locke. He'd gone dark weeks earlier, but not before leaking just enough to map a path through the maze. Ellie had barely slept for days, every moment consumed by preparing for what they knew would be a point of no return. The plan was simple. Access the central terminal, extract all remaining records, and release the truth into the world through a secure mirror node, one that couldn't be scrubbed. But deep down, Ellie knew it wouldn't be that easy. As they reached the control room, the lights flickered on manually. Someone had activated them. And sitting in the center chair, calmly watching the monitors, was Ben. He didn't look surprised to see her. In fact, he smiled like he'd been waiting. "You made it," he said softly, as if they were still just two people in love, not pawns on opposite sides of a decades-long lie. "I always hoped you'd get this far, but I won't pretend I wasn't trying to stop it." Ellie's breath caught in her throat. The betrayal hit harder now, knowing it hadn't just been about surveillance, it had been emotional engineering. Ben had been designed, assigned, embedded into her life with a precision that made her skin crawl. And still, part of her wanted to believe it wasn't all fake. That maybe something real had existed between them, even if it had started with a lie. But as she looked into his eyes now, she saw none of that. Just duty. Cold and mechanical. "Why?" she demanded, stepping forward, fists clenched. "Why me? Why any of us?" Ben stood and walked to a nearby panel, pressing a few buttons until a hologram filled the room. Images of children, maps, DNA sequences, psychological evaluations. The scale of it made Ellie dizzy. "It was never about you," he said. "You were a variable, a control, a way to measure the behavioral patterns of synthetic memory over time. Halcyon wasn't a failure. It worked better than anyone expected. You are the proof." Maya grabbed Ellie's arm. "We don't have time. We pull the data now, or they'll wipe everything." But Ben didn't flinch. He tapped another command into the terminal, and the screen shifted to surveillance footage. Ellie's house. Her college dorm. Her grandfather's funeral. The day she met Maya. "We didn't just build your memories," he said. "We built your reality. Every choice you made was anticipated. Every question you asked was logged. The only thing we didn't predict was your emotional resistance. The part of you that couldn't be trained." Ellie felt sick. The last puzzle piece wasn't a what, it was a how. They hadn't just manipulated her from the outside. They'd created an ecosystem of deception, wrapped in layers of emotional connection so thick it became indistinguishable from love, friendship, grief, and curiosity. And now they wanted to erase it all like a software reset. Maya had already started the extraction. Red bars raced across the terminal screen, copying files to a secure drive. But Ben moved fast, stepping in and locking out the sequence. "If you finish this, they'll kill everyone involved. Not just us. Everyone. Including your mother. Including the others on that list." Ellie stared at him, heart pounding, torn between fury and fear. He was bluffing. He had to be. But the look in his eyes said otherwise. That's when a voice echoed from the back wall, raspy, tired, but unmistakable. He's not lying. Out from the shadows stepped a figure Ellie hadn't seen in years, her grandfather. He looked older than she remembered, gaunt and graying, like he'd aged twice as fast in hiding. But it was him. No clone. No memory implant. Just the man who started it all. I tried to stop it, he said, voice cracking. I tried to kill it before it evolved into what it is now. But I failed. They took my research, turned it into a weapon. And Ben? He's just a failsafe. One of many. Ellie's knees nearly buckled. Everything she'd been chasing had led her back here, to a room filled with ghosts, betrayals, and one final, devastating truth. There's one more thing you need to know, her grandfather said, pulling a key from around his neck and inserting it into the final terminal port. You weren't just monitored. You were the anomaly, the one they couldn't control. And because of that, you're the only one who can shut it down. The system lit up, a final override appearing. But it came with a price. If you do this, Ben warned, you erase all trace of the project, including every synthetic subject tied to it. Maya, the others, their identities, their lives, all of it gone. Forever. It was the impossible choice Ellie had feared. Protect the ones who'd been created through a lie, or stop the machine from ever doing it again. And then, as the countdown began, a new line of code flashed on the screen, one no one had written. Subject 01 is aware. Maya stepped back, her face going pale. That's not me, she whispered. Ellie looked at the screen, realization crashing over her. She wasn't Subject 01. She was Subject 0. And someone else, someone higher, had just woken up. The terminal hummed with a strange finality as the override completed its cycle. Ellie stood in silence, watching the lines of code dissolve like sand in water, everything vanishing from the screen, the identities, the backups, the architecture of Halcyon itself. One by one, each synthetic record began erasing itself, blinking out like distant stars dying in the night. She didn't speak, not even as Maya's image flickered on the edge of her peripheral vision. The program hadn't deleted her physically. Maya was still there, breathing, trembling, real in every visible way. But Ellie could already sense something changing. There was a slow unraveling in Maya's eyes, a soft fading of recognition, as if pieces of her memory were slipping silently away. The worst part wasn't the glitch. It was that Maya didn't understand what she was losing. That was the trade-off. Ellie had saved the world from a synthetic future built on invisible chains, but in doing so, she had to sever the closest connection she'd ever had. Outside, dawn broke over the horizon. Rain still fell, but the storm had passed, leaving a silver glow on the wet pavement. The broadcasting tower stood like a relic of a forgotten war, quiet now, its machines finally at rest. The truth wasn't broadcast in a dramatic press conference or leaked to the media in some flashy, viral upload. It was buried quietly, encrypted and handed off to someone who would know when and how to tell it right. The world wasn't ready yet. But Ellie was. She had seen what unchecked surveillance and manufactured emotion could do to people. She'd lived inside a perfectly engineered lie. And even after everything, she still believed in real connection, raw memory, and the kind of truth that doesn't come with a download button. Her grandfather's body had been taken by a separate team, the ones on the inside who had been quietly rooting for the program's destruction. In the final hours, he had left her a video message, a sort of apology mixed with a warning. He hadn't meant for things to go as far as they did. It had started with grief, his own loss, his own obsession with what memories could do if preserved and optimized. But as with all good intentions, the tech spiraled. What began as healing had morphed into control. In the video, he told Ellie something that would never leave her. The real danger isn't machines thinking like people. It's people thinking like machines, efficient, cold, optimized at the cost of pain, at the cost of soul. Maya stayed for a while. They walked together, sat on park benches, shared quiet mornings, though Ellie noticed more pieces of her slipping away each day. The shared moments that once meant everything now echoed faintly. It hurt like nothing Ellie had ever known, not because Maya stopped loving her, but because Maya wouldn't remember she ever had. Eventually, she moved away, starting a new life somewhere with a new name and a blank canvas, unaware of the pages that had been torn from her story. Ben disappeared. No records, no sightings. Ellie suspected he had been absorbed back into some darker layer of what was left of the program, or maybe he had never truly existed outside of the parameters built for her. Either way, she stopped chasing him. Some ghosts aren't meant to be found. Ellie went back to her mother's house eventually, digging through old family photos, restoring what few physical memories she had left. It was slow, quiet healing. No dramatic music, no final confrontation. Just real life. Grief. Recovery. The slow rebuilding of identity not handed to her, but forged by her own choices. She started writing, telling parts of her story disguised as fiction, leaving just enough truth between the lines for those who might recognize it. She got messages, quiet ones, from strangers who had seen pieces of their own lives reflected in hers. Survivors of systems they couldn't name, people with blank years in their timelines, folks who swore someone had once tried to overwrite who they were. Ellie didn't respond to all of them, but she read every word. Years later, she visited the now decommissioned facility where it all ended. The government had bulldozed most of it, sealed the rest underground. There was nothing left but a concrete slab, a faded perimeter fence, and the weight of everything that had once happened there. She left a single photo behind, a snapshot of her and Maya, taken before the world had started falling apart, before secrets became currency and truth became something you had to fight for. The photo didn't mean much to anyone else, but to Ellie, it was the only proof she needed that something real had existed in a place built entirely on fiction. She turned away, not with a sense of triumph, but with clarity. Not all mysteries are meant to be solved with finality. Some are meant to be lived through, survived, remembered for what they revealed about who we are and what we're capable of becoming. The past had tried to erase her, but she chose to remain. And just before she walked away for good, her phone buzzed. One unread message. No number. Just 5 words. Subject 0 still in play. Ellie stared at it for a long time, then smiled. Not out of fear, but defiance. The story wasn't over. It never really is. She deleted the message and walked into the sunlight.